Okay, so this is a sort of a review and just exposition of some stuff that I got from Mantic and a couple of other bits and bobs. Now, pardon the background of things. That's partly to block out some of the light and stuff. The missus always says that the background is too busy, but, you know, I don't have a different background. Anyway, one of the reasons, this will come up in some of the newer videos that I do, or future videos that I'm going to do. I've tried to buy less Games Workshop stuff with my hobby allowance, partly because I've got a lot of Games Workshop stuff and I haven't played a game in about 7 years, but also partly because I wanted to sort of spread the love and support more independent makers and smaller units. Obviously that there and that there, they're Games Workshop models, and that's lots of different Games Workshop models all stuck together. I'll explain them in a minute. But this is a Mantic Plague. I think it's like a Mantic Plague booster force, which is some of the vehicles in the background, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so I think something that they call a mega force. So you got in the booster, you got two of these walkers, and you got a dropship, and you got these two buggies. I think you got two buggies. You might have got one, and the other one came with the bigger set. And then there's also these sort of plague zombies, and you got these enormous. I don't play any of the Mantic games, and I'm not really familiar with their stuff. I just like the models, so I don't know what these things are actually called. What I did, if it's not blindingly obvious, is I remember that those things are called bursters, because that's a fairly easy name to remember. Now that one there, just to go off topic a little, that's actually, when they sent the stuff, they sent enough legs and arms to make 3, but not enough body. So the body of that, this is just an aside, I once bought the Orc Wyvern on, the Orc War Boss on a Wyvern, or Wyvern, however you want to say it, and there was an extra body in the box, so I had this great big chunk of metal, but nothing to do with it. So in the end, I kept it, because you keep everything, and in the end, I managed to use it for this model. So the big chunk of metal is obviously obscured by sculpt and putty, and then just painted over to match the others. So there were 3 of them. So as I was saying, if it's not blindingly obvious, I've organised this like a guardsman platoon, because why wouldn't I? Because that seems to be all I ever collect. So you'd run those as Ogryns, and then you'd also run those things as Ogryns, and those things just sort of different versions of Ogryns, because obviously these would be evil guardsmen who are befouled by some horrible affliction. So I put 3 mortar teams into 1 heavy weapon squad, and then there are these little dogs to make up they come with the Mantic models, sort of plague hound things. The dogs make up the squads into 10-person units. I'm not sure how good the light here is. The little infantry, the standard infantry, I think they're actually really good. They're made of hard plastic, so the plastic glue works rather than having to use super glue. And the detail's really quite good. And they go together, I'm not going to say they go together really super easy, but then neither do Cadians. Now this thing, this sort of abomination in the front, it's made of most of the model. I got it on eBay years and years ago. It was an unknown large scale model of a werewolf with a club. I'm not sure why a werewolf would use a club, but that's what it is. So the club and the arms, they're the two arms holding the club, and the legs, that's all one piece. It's all made of white metal. The extra arms, the orky face thing, the helmet, and the weapons, they're plastic pieces from Games Workshop stuff, mostly orcs, I think. They're now called Iron Jaws, those parts. Now on the runner that glues into the base, there was a name when I was cleaning this model up to repaint it to fit in with this force. I think it's Bill Roth. I don't know if Bill Roth still makes models. I did give it a look up on the internet, but I couldn't really find it. That one there, that's just weirdness. There's orc parts. It's got two heads, one's coming out of his bum. This is an orc giant hand, and a weird trotter. And that's the hair from the old metal Eldar avatar. I figured that because that model's horribly mutated and I don't have a Beastman army anymore, that it might as well go here. This is an original Genestealer Patriarch. What I did was I glued this gun with a great big battery pack hanging off it, and I gave him a Lizardman club because I realised that this army didn't have any characters. So I've got mutant 2 pig-headed guy, I've got weird werewolf guy, this original Genestealer Patriarch, and then obviously those three are painted up as much as possible to blend in with the rest, and then this original Necron Warrior. Now it came on a White Dwarf, I think in the very late 90s, on a blister pack, and it stayed in the blister pack until quite recently. It's all metal and it's one piece. Now the hair, if you don't recognize it, the hair came from the original Dark Eldar Warrior set, and because I keep all of my spare parts, so I just thought, well, to make him seem fun and fit him with the rest of these misbegotten wretches, I'd give him weird hair. So he's some sort of strange robot that's, I don't know, gonna fight with these fellas. Now the infantry and even the bigger infantry, like these are made of, I think, resin, so they're not made of hard plastic. They had to be super glued and pinned. They're quite good. The detail on them is fairly good, and because there's so much detail on them, that they're oddly easy to paint, because it's just a succession of washes done in layers, and the washes make it look like you've spent more time than you actually have. They're pretty good, and as I said, the infantry go together with plastic glue, so they're pretty good. And then those are made of white metal, so they have to be drilled and pinned. Now the vehicles are made of a cheaper plastic. It's so these weren't so bad. I don't believe I had to, or did I? No, I did. I had to pin these because they would not stay together. There's just so much. They're made of this strange, it's softer to the touch kind of a plastic. You know, they've been painted with washes and then sealed with the Storm Shield varnish that Games Workshop sell. The drop ships, the guns on them are this horrible cheap plastic like you would get on a normal toy. It's you know, that kind of, like if you drop it, it makes a dull sound and it bounces a bit like a ball. It's not hard plastic, and they need to be super glued on, but the rest of them will plastic glue. What I will say about the dropships is obviously that the dropship functions in both in the Force and then obviously for the size of the thing, like a Games Workshop Valkyrie, and they cost a lot less, and you can get 3 of these for like 70 quid, I think it is, in what they call a TAD dropship wing or something. I think they're called a Hornet. And And then obviously you've got the choice. You don't have to have the little cargo box on the bottom. You can have them with or without that, and the doors can be open or closed. I might have to just move some models. So well, this extreme close-up gives you, you know, the detail that is, it's definitely acceptable. So you can have, like in this one, I've got a little scene of you know, casualties inside being airlifted around inside of this this tactical dropship kind of a deal. But because they're plague casualties, they're kind of useful as weapons, I would think, because they're going to spread whatever the contagion is. So that's a little diorama as well as being a model in of itself. Now, oh, that was a thing. This one, when it came, obviously I've talked about getting spare parts as part of model kits. The reason that that one is sat on the ground and that one is sat on a flying base, I will say, just as part of a review, if you will, that the flying base on that one, it's too long and it doesn't glue in properly, and there were no instructions. So it was only through having put many model kits together that I was able to sort of slap that together by looking at the pictures and looking at the parts that I had. This one, I had to cut the flying base down and then permanently glue it into place so that it wasn't too obtrusive, because otherwise it was just going to snap its own flying base. So now it's permanently on a scenic base, but it's only quite low to the ground. The other one, it was supplied without a flying base, which obviously is problematic. You can't have a flying vehicle just sat on the ground, and I didn't want to have to make a flying base for it. So I had, having collected guardsmen for so long, all sorts of spare parts from guard kits. So these little feet, I do not remember what they're off, but I got them out of the bits box and glued them on, and so it stands on them, so the doors don't actually meet the ground, you know, because otherwise the base on it would be massive. Now the final thing that I wanted to talk about was these little cars. Hang on, I'll bring one over so that I'm not having to reach across the entire sort of scene, if you will. Now, let's bring one up close and put the we'll put the original Patriarch on it for scale. So obviously these functionally are like a little Taurox type thing. It's an all-terrain vehicle, and it has a machine gun on the top, and it carries troops, and it's got, you know, this, I don't know what you would call that, spiky thing at the front. They're actually quite good. Again, they're quite cheap compared to, say, a Taurox. They're not massively cheaper, they're a few pounds cheaper. But what I will say is, although the majority of this kit goes together quite well, and again there were no instructions, but although the majority of this kit goes together quite well and it's made of a nice hard plastic like the infantry, the wheels on these are made of, again, that sort of cheap toy plastic. And it's just such a shame. If they'd have just used the proper plastic for I know it's a cost-cutting thing, and I know wheels aren't necessarily that important, but if you press it, I don't actually know if you can see that in the video, but basically there's more flex on the structural parts of the model than you would get on, say, any Games Workshop model, because Games Workshop models are completely solid. But yeah, it's almost like it's got real suspension, but of course it's not actually suspension, it's just the parts of the model flex more than they should. And obviously, if it's not an active spring, like on a dynamic part, say like on a radio control car, you don't want flex in a model, you want it to be solid. So although it's good value, and I do maintain that it is good value, compared to say a Taurox, and obviously it gives you a different aesthetic. The little car, I can't remember what it's called, on Mantic's site. It's got a name. Obviously all of this stuff's going to have a name, but that little car, they are good value. However, and the sort of roof mounted gun is made of the same cheap toy plastic. When it's glued on and painted up and varnished, and it looks exactly the same as everything else, and that's fine, but it's just a bit of a I'm not even going to say letdown. It's just, how to describe it, you feel like they could have done better. Not that it's disappointing or anything. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just know that when the rest of the model is made out of the high grade plastic, it's strange to have a couple of parts that aren't like the gun on the dropship or the wheels on the cars, or the guns on these walkers. Now, obviously, in a guard army, these just be sentinels, and I think oddly this is probably a more realistic interpretation of what a sentinel would actually look like. You know, it's got the chainsaw for clearing trees and obstacles, and it's got the flamethrower for clearance, like as a clearance incinerator. And then it has, I don't actually know if you can see this, there's one of them, there we go, that one there I built with the different cockpit designs. So there's with the little man inside with the controls, and I think it's more realistic. But the weapons are again made of that strange toy plastic. It's just odd. I suppose maybe it's not that odd. Maybe Games Workshop's the odd one out, and actually other companies do take cost saving measures. I don't know. The final thing I was going to say was about the basing, because I haven't talked about the bases. Obviously they've got this really cheerful kind of foresty, gravelly thing going on. They came, it's just flock and this strange stuff that looks a bit like coffee. Little model rocks. Don't know if that's focusing. Yeah. They just go on with PVA like normal. The little rocks, they look terrible when you first start putting them on, but then they look quite good when you're finished. Anyway, that's more than long enough talking about these, but as a review I think it was important to mention the Mantic stuff, good value for money, genuinely good value for money, but just some strange design choices in terms of materials, and again, for the length of the flying base on these things, quite odd. Just a final note, I have no idea how these things would work, these fans. They look so purposeful and so, you know, futuristic. And I know that there's that aircraft that's used by the US Marines that can fly as a normal aeroplane, and it can be used as a helicopter, but the rotors on that thing are attached in what seems like a logical way, but these, I don't know how that would spin. I'm not an engineer, but every time I look at it I think, would that work? Anyway, that was just an aside. Right, I've waffled on long enough. Okay, bye.